Welcome back everyone, it's Charlie. This will be my full House of the Dragon Season 2 Episode 8 video. There were a ton of Easter eggs and book references and connections to the original Game of Thrones show, some more literal than others. There are even some scenes meant to set up characters we'll see on other upcoming TV shows like Night of the Seven Kingdoms with the Blood Raven. I'll be doing videos for that show too, just like I do for House of the Dragon, like I did for the original show Game of Thrones. We'll start seeing trailers for it later this year. Alright? Everybody grab your swords, time to storm King's Landing. Just have a couple things to take care of before we do that. There were also a lot of book changes, so we'll break it all down. I'm also working on some of my House of the Dragon Season 3 videos right now too, so be sure to subscribe to get everything. Careful for spoilers, if you have not seen the finale yet, we'll be talking about everything, starting with the episode title, The Queen Who Ever Was. This is a reference to both Rhaenyra and Rhaenys, Corlys's flagship, which he renamed from the Sea Snake to The Queen Who Never Was to honor Rhaenys. But ever was, as in always was, is Rhaenyra reference. It's meant to be a parallel for the title of the Season 1 finale, which was The Black Queen as well too. The idea that the Queen Who Ever Was is the show saying that she was always the queen, the rightful queen. Like you always were the queen, even though we have all these problems with the Greens right now. Daemon kind of says the same thing to her later in the episode when he bends the knee again, swearing his fealty again, like you are the queen, you are the one to unite us all against the Long Night. Tying things back to all of Daemon's Weirwood visions and seeing her sitting on the Iron Throne with her crown, and also setting up Season 3, which they imply she will take King's Landing and actually sit on that Iron Throne for real, bringing it full circle from Season 1 when she was named the heir and the realm swore fealty to her at the end of Episode 1. Like the circle is now complete. We'll see if he tells her about beheading the young version of her in that one vision of his. Like, well, there was this one vision I did have where we did kind of come to blows and I wound up cutting your head off. But don't worry, I'm totally past it now. They added to the intro tapestry again, they added a scene depicting the events of the end of Episode 7 with Vhagar and Aemon coming for Dragonstone and Rhaenyra scaring him off with all of her new dragons. The bloody lines between Vhagar and Syrax around them here are a reference to the bloodlines of old Valyria, the dragon seeds themselves having Valyrian blood in their veins. Then we see all the dragons that she has available to her here on Dragonstone. That's why Caraxes isn't here because he's over at Harrenhal. But these are all the current dragons that she has available to her besides that. The opening scene starts with Tywin Lannister meeting with the Triarchy to negotiate for their fleet and financial support in Tyrosh, this area right here on the map. Their initial demand for their fleet is 100 dragons, which of course he cannot deliver. Their final price is the Stepstones, which they've been fighting Corlys Velaryon throughout Season 1 for, both in the flashbacks and then closer to present day too, like it's been an ongoing battle with the Triarchy. This is probably a lie on their part, like they claim that they'll clean up their pirate ways in the Stepstones and just impose a tax on passing vessels. It'll probably be way worse than that. There was also a bit where they slide in the fact that he doesn't have to worry about Aemon being pissed at him because he'll have enough forces to take the Iron Throne himself. That could prove problematic in the future. We'll see about that. They introduced Shirako Lohar, who is a character from the books and just the admiral of the Triarchy during this period in the Dance of the Dragons. They turned her into a bigger character on the show, though. There's not a whole lot of book material about her. They turn her into a much bigger character, just having her mess with him left and right. Like, you have to mud wrestle me to get my fleet. Also, too, on the side note, you're gonna have to screw all my wives. Love all the scenes of the mud wrestling when he, finally starts punching her. Like, okay, fine, I will hit a woman. You can kind of tell that he was letting himself be thrown around there because he was afraid to actually fight with her. Decorum will only last so far with him. And I love the way during their dinner where he actually starts doing the mental math after she says that he has to screw all of her wives. Like, how many times am I going to have to do this? Not if he'll do it, but how many times is it going to be? Then we see his revenge for what happened at the end of Episode 7, Rhaenyra gaining the new Dragon Seas, the writers for Vermithor, Silverwing, and Seasmoke. Aemon promptly craps his pants, probably for the first time in his adult life, and took Vhagar and burned Sharp Point. R.I.P. to all those people in the city. We actually heard about Sharp Point earlier this season. Corlys Velaryon said that Bar-Ammon was spending one of his boys to work on his flagship during the Dance of the Dragons. Now we know why he name-dropped Sharp Point, because R.I.P., most of that city just got burned. This is meant to show you how Aemond is reacting more and more unhinged to threats on this level, what Rhaenyra just threw at him. He's been spending his entire life thinking that he had the most powerful dragon and he was invincible. Now, not so much. Alicent calls him on this later, like he basically burns Sharp Point to reassert himself, make himself feel powerful again. Like, yes, I do have the most powerful dragon. But a big part in this episode is him coming slowly unhinged in that facade that he's been holding up since he claimed Vhagar, since he started acting like he was invincible, is crumbling around him. It almost seems like he starts to cry later in the episode. Like, he doesn't openly start crying, but he seems like he's about to weep. Suddenly, Mr. Invincible is acting like that scared little boy all over again. That was kind of the vibe of his therapy sessions that he was having with Sylvie in the brothel, like him slowly regressing back into that boy-like state, confessing all these things that he wouldn't do in the light of day when he was walking around acting like he was invincible. Then we see Aegon getting his daily care from the Grand Maester. He asked for some rum. He's broken, but he still loves himself a little bit of rum. Normally they'd be giving him milk of the poppy, but you remember that was a big thing for Larys Strong. Do not take this, it will dull your wits. This whole arc here, like the Aegon and Larys stuff, is a big book change from Fire and Blood. The Maesters recorded that Aegon spent an entire year nearly comatose hopped up on milk of the poppy 24/7. But in this scene here, when Larys comes to see him, another big book change, Larys tries to sell him on the idea to escape to Essos until the Dance of the Dragons blows over, Larys expecting that Rhaenyra, the Blacks, Aemond, and the Greens will just mutually destroy each other. You can swoop in and fix everything. There was actually a version of this plot during The Boys Season 4 episodes this year. I did videos for that, like a completely separate show, completely separate mythology, but same basic idea, where there's this giant war and somebody swooping in to be the savior. Larys Strong trying to get Aegon to just come chill out on a beach with him for the next couple years till the Dance of the Dragons blows over. He also tells him that Aemond, in his anger and fear over the dragon seas and other dragons, would be much more likely to kill him, which probably is not wrong. Aemond is probably just looking for an excuse to get rid of Aegon for good. He also tells him that if Rhaenyra prevails and takes King's Landing, which she probably will, not if, but when she does, the first thing she's going to do is kill him. And she's not wrong, because Alicent and Rhaenyra talk about this at the end of the episode, and Rhaenyra basically says that she's going to chop Aegon's head off. So it is time for Aegon to get out of Dodge. And I don't think this is meant to be some kind of long con from Larys Strong, like he genuinely wants to help Aegon, even though he does want to stay close to power. It's kind of the same thing for Mysaria. Mysaria seems like she believes in Rhaenyra, but she also does want to stay close to power. So it's not like Larys Strong or Mysaria on both sides of this are both being selfless beings. They still want power. But now you see why Larys made such a big deal about getting Aegon walking again so fast after the battle at Rook's Rest, so that Aegon would be physically capable of making the journey east with him. If they'd paced out his recovery like it goes in the book's timeline, he'd still be unconscious at this point, hopped up on milk of the poppy. Aegon starts asserting himself more, claiming he does want the Iron Throne again, but eventually agrees with Larys' plan. We'll see how that storyline bears out in Season 3. It could either turn into an Arya and Braavos kind of storyline, where they were just looking somewhere to stash her for a couple seasons until she developed all these skills to bring her back to Westeros. But I don't think he's completely gone from the plot for like a lot of Season 3. I think we'll just check in with him and Larys in the East for a while, unless something really big happens to them on their way to the East. Speaking of which, there are a lot of theories that Sunfire, his dragon, is still alive in the woods near Rook's Rest, recovering, just like Aegon, and unable to fly currently. But even with the speedrun version of the books that the show is doing with his recovery, I don't think that Aegon or Sunfire, if Sunfire is still alive, would be able to fly or fight again or do much of anything until the end of Season 3, maybe like beginning of Season 4. But everything that Helaena tells to Aemond during the episode basically confirms that Aegon will be back and he will retake the Iron Throne eventually. Couple of interesting bits of information that Larys Strong reveals here too. We find out what he did with all the money from Harrenhal that he inherited when he killed his father and brother. Instead of moving it to King's Landing like Simon Strong thought that he did, Larys actually moved it to the Iron Bank in Braavos, which is actually a pretty solid plan. As we know, the Iron Bank of Braavos is still going strong hundreds of years later in the timeline during the events of the main show. Whereas in King's Landing, the Greens have emptied the crown's gold, essentially the crown is bankrupt, which is going to cause a huge problem for Rhaenyra when she tries to take the Iron Throne back at the beginning of Season 3. Gotta feed all those hungry people in King's Landing somehow, and she seems like she spent a lot of her gold on Operation Snack Time earlier this season when she fed all the small folk. I hope she's bringing a whole lot of boats full of food with her. Couple of funny things going on around the room here too. Like obviously it's a very serious scene, but if you look around the room at some of the set decoration, this has been here for a while, but they don't pan around the room that often. On the walls, they have all these designs of people just humping their brains out. The even funnier thing about this is that when Viserys lived in these chambers during Season 1 when he was still alive, is that they were all adorned with decorations of dragons humping each other. And as you can imagine, Alicent, not a huge fan of seeing dragons humping each other everywhere she looked inside his room. Corlys and Rhaenyra talk on Driftmark at his shipyard about Helaena and Dreamfire. She doesn't even consider her a threat, correctly so, because there's no way that she'd fight. Like, Rhaenyra is 100% here. There's no way that Helaena would do something like that. When Corlys says Aemon will continue to burn cities, not stopping with Sharp Point, that's actually a book reference to things that will eventually happen later, even if they change it a little bit for the TV show. I think we'll see versions of that go down. But I don't want to get too far ahead of the story because the show does change so much, so there's no way of knowing how they're going to adapt that specifically. But Corlys is not wrong. Aemon will continue to burn as much as he possibly can. She notices his flagship, the Sea Snake, which is also Corlys's nickname. He's called the Sea Snake in the books. He tells her, though, that he's since renamed the ship the Queen Who Never Was, naming her in honor of Rhaenys, R.I.P. Writing now to her greater glory, saying that the Sea Snake had been a testament to his own selfish desire for glory. The renaming is also a bit of a callback to the title of the episode, The Queen Who Ever Was, which is more of a reference to Rhaenyra, though. At Harrenhal, Daemon tells the men to feed Caraxes more pigs just because they started to run out of other livestock, and good news, Caraxes prefers pigs. They say the Rivermen will be ready to march in 2 days, and he plans to march them to King's Landing and take King's Landing before the Lannister army shows up to Harrenhal. And at the end of the episode, we see them showing up at the Riverlands so that they're almost at Harrenhal, but they're not quite at Harrenhal yet. Love the little chuckle that escapes him when Alfred Broom walks in because he knows that she's from Rhaenyra, like Rhaenyra is checking up on him. Like, I see, she's trying to see what I'm up to here. But the big twist here is that Alfred Broom really tries to throw Rhaenyra under the bus, and I love the way that Daemon takes him to the Godswood to talk to him. Just so many scenes of Daemon in the Godswood here, probably because of all his visions later in the episode. Like, they just really want you to focus on this area. But he essentially tries to get Daemon to usurp Rhaenyra and take command of the army for himself, which they thought that he might do previously. Love Simon Strong also kind of peeping on them in the distance too, like, wait, what is he doing? He's going to take this army for himself. But because Daemon has gone a full 180 character arc, now he is fully Team Rhaenyra, so of course he's not going to try and usurp her. But I do love the way that he plays with Alfred Broom here just a little bit. And the way that Alfred Broom kind of pauses for a second, like, what is that on the wind? Just another reference to Alice Rivers, which Daemon also talks about when he says, barking at the moon. Basically a callback to all of his visions and more Alice Rivers stuff. Essentially him saying that weird stuff happens here, just be prepared for that. Then Aemon starts to piss off the small folk even more by totally blocking the entrance from King's Landing's harbor so even the fishermen boats can't get in and out. So that means people are beginning to starve even faster. And the way the showrunner explained Aemon versus the small folk is that he's not even thinking about them as if they're an actual entity that he needs to worry about, like they're not even a blip on his radar. Normally that would bite him in the ass, but if Rhaenyra takes King's Landing at the beginning of Season 3, it's really going to be her problem, not Aemon's problem. We will see how she resolves that situation, or does not resolve it. Then we get a small conversation between Helaena and Alicent where she's not in Dragon Dream mode, but like she's actually present for their conversation as opposed to off in outer space having another Dragon Dream. And she basically tells Alicent she doesn't want to be queen. Like, I hate being queen. I was much happier before this. And notice the reaction on Alicent's face as if she wants to say, me too, I was happy before I became queen. I didn't want any of this. But that would also mean telling her that she didn't want to have all these children too, including Helaena, who she does love. Like, she does love her children. But to be fair, she never wanted to be a teenage bride or be a teenage mother, which she was. Like, she had her first baby when she was 16 years old. That's part of the reason why she was so pissed off at Rhaenyra when they were younger, which she apologizes for at the end of the episode. Because she had to be pregnant when she was 16 while Rhaenyra was just walking around humping Harwin Strong all over the Red Keep. The interesting thing here, though, is that Alicent tries to get Helaena to leave King's Landing with her. Just like Larys Strong is trying to get Aegon to sneak out, but unsuccessfully, because as Helaena says, what would I do? Where would I go? Also, I think part of the reason why she's not rushing to try and escape King's Landing, because she's seen everything in her dragon dreams. She knows how it's going to play out. She knows how she's going to die as well, too. And it sounds like she's made her peace with what her fate will eventually be, because as she talks to Aemon later, when he threatens to kill her, like, I could have you killed for telling me how I'm going to die, she says, it won't change anything. Even if you kill me, then you will still die the same way. So it seems like Helaena has just seen how everybody's going to die, and she's been processing it. Like, no, I'm cool, I'll stay here in King's Landing, they're not going to kill me, I'll be fine, I'll die some other way. We get our next big Dreamfire mention when Aemon basically orders her to fly into battle with Vhagar and the Greens, the other current dragon, go to Harrenhal with him. Daeron and Tessarion is their other current dragon. Remember, they think that Sunfire is dead right now, so they're not really considering Sunfire an asset. We haven't really talked about Dreamfire that much this season outside of the whole controversy surrounding Daenerys' dragon eggs. But Dreamfire is one of the oldest and thus biggest, most powerful dragons that exists right now, and she's the mother of a lot of the dragons that are alive, grandmother of some of the dragons too. Most of the dragons that you see on the show are either children or grandchildren of Silverwing or Dreamfire. But for Aemon, she's more like an asset. He's thinking more like an actual chessboard. So I've got this nuclear weapon sitting in the storeroom. Why don't we pull that out? Let's not leave that on the ground. But as a lot of people predicted, they talked about this during the trailer, is that Helaena isn't really a fighter. Like, she would never want to burn anyone, even if she didn't say that during this episode, which she does. Like, I'm not going to hurt anybody. That's not me. They almost make it seem like Aemon intended to grab Helaena and literally drag her to the dragon pit and throw her on Dreamfire's back. Like, what is his plan after this? Like, where was he going to take her? Was he going to throw her in the black cells until she agreed to mount Dreamfire? That's how unhinged he is right now, how crazy afraid he is. Alicent calls him out for being total crazy town banana pants. This is also meant to be a continuation of their conversation when he fired her from the small council, and she was implying the reason why he was being such a butthole is because of all the childhood trauma that he never got past. This whole conversation gives Alicent the idea to pull a Rhaenyra of her own, steal a trick from Rhaenyra, and sneak into Dragonstone to try and do the same thing that Rhaenyra did earlier this season. The only way to avoid all this bloodshed is to get Rhaenyra to sack King's Landing without actually having to sack it or any bloodshed. So essentially, Aemon is crazy enough that Alicent feels like she needs to throw him under the bus. Then we get Criston Cole seeming like he's still suffering from PTSD from Rook's Rest while he fondles Alicent's favor that she was forced to give him earlier this season. She didn't want to do that, and it seems pretty clear at this point that their little tryst is over, like she's done with him, but he's still kind of obsessed with her. Gwaine Hightower finally challenges him at sword point, calling him on his affair with Alicent. I think he figured out what was going on between them the first time that he rolled up in the Red Keep. He probably just waited to this point to finally call him on it. Who then claims that if Gwaine does send him to the wall, force him to take the black, then that would mean everybody finding out what he'd done with Alicent and stain the Hightower's good name for a good long while. He reveals how Alicent saved his life twice when he was younger, when he tried to kill himself in the King's Landing Godswood, but she stopped him. The other time saving him from the headman's axe was when he admitted to the affair with Rhaenyra. He would have been executed if Alicent had told Viserys the truth, which she did not. This is meant to be a very bleak, very serious conversation, but there are a couple of funny bits that he slips in here. He apologizes for being so horny on Maine. He tries to claim that no men have true honor. We know that's not true because Brienne of Tarth is probably the best example of what a truly honorable person is. He says he used to believe in more traditional values and virtues, but that all went out the window at Rook's Rest after he saw what destruction the dragons brought. And that is essentially what their future is. His whole poem about the dragons dancing is a callback to the name of the conflict in the books, the Targaryen Civil War, the Dance of the Dragons. In that they're nothing compared to the power of the dragons. What they're doing now does not matter. He also sounds like he's 100% sure that they're all going to die soon and nothing matters, like he's gone complete nihilism now. Even Gwaine Hightower yells at him a little for being too dark, like that's messed up, dude. Rhaenyra hosts a feast for the new dragon seeds, Hugh Hammer, Ulf White, Adam Hull. You can tell she, and especially Jace, start to bristle a little at Ulf White's lack of composure, formality, because he was raised in Flea Bottom, where manners of a royal household are not a thing at all. He goes like full Florida man at the Queen's table. It would be like watching National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation if Queen Elizabeth had eaten dinner with the Griswolds, like the most ridiculous thing you'd ever see. He even kind of interrupts her too when she's giving her toast, demanding more wine, more little birds, basically like their version of little chicken creatures. The other dragon seeds also don't seem too hot on Ulf White either. I think this is mostly setting up trouble on Team Black, showing how Ulf White might potentially become a bigger problem for Rhaenyra later on. I think they want to show that he cares more about the trappings of wealth and power and status given to him by being a dragon rider, rather than supporting Rhaenyra the way that she wants them to support her. Paying off more of Jace's misgivings and what the Dragon Keepers said to her when they quit, that the whole endeavor here with the Dragon Seeds was pure hubris on her part. The dragons are sacred, and what she was doing will ultimately become a terrible idea. So I think the idea here, and we see it more with Jace's scene when he admonishes Ulf White later in the episode, threatening to take his head, that not all dragon seeds might be on the same page, and because they all control nuclear weapons, that's a huge problem for Rhaenyra brewing in the background going into Season 3 if not everybody on her team with nuclear weapons agrees on the same plan. It would not be a Game of Thrones show if there was not some betrayal inside both camps. Like Alicent betrays the Greens this episode, the same thing could wind up happening to Rhaenyra during Season 3. Then Rhaenyra gets word from Simon Strong at Harrenhal, who's worried that Daemon built this army of Rivermen for himself and won't support Rhaenyra's claim in favor of putting himself on the Iron Throne, which he implied he would do earlier this season. Part of the idea here too is that she's so juiced up on dragon energy since the successful sowing of the seeds. She feels way more powerful just in general. She flies straight to Harrenhal herself to see what's what with Daemon. Love the scene of Alice Rivers just showing up in Daemon's room, Batman style. When he calls her a witch, that's a reference to her being called the Witch of Harrenhal in the books. Daemon sees one of the children of the forest at the weirwood tree. He thinks that he's just seeing a vision, like he's starting to see things like he's been seeing visions this whole time there. When he doubles back and doesn't see them again, he thinks that it's just a figment of his imagination because he's been seeing so many visions since he's been here. But I think that was meant to be one of the members of the Children of the Forest standing at the weirwood, like they were actually there briefly for just a hot second and then took off. I'd actually been wondering all season if we'd see the Children of the Forest during this series at some point. Alice Rivers then tells Daemon that he's ready to get the full Weirwood Network info dump, like download all the information from the Weirwood internet. He prepares to watch all the Game of Thrones DVDs, the Blackfire Rebellion, some stuff we might see during Night of the Seven Kingdoms TV show, like literally everything that happens later in the timeline. Notice when he touches the face of the Weirwood tree, it's bleeding red sap. All the Weirwoods do that. Love the way they dial this up for dramatic effect, too. The face is actually meant to be modeled after George R. Martin's face. They made a big deal about it when they brought him to set, too. Like, look, we put your face on the weirwood here. So it's almost like George R. Martin here is giving Daemon all the spoilers for everything that's going to happen later in the timeline. Maybe if he kept his hand on the tree longer, he would have told him how Winds of Winter and Dream of Spring are going to end. But Alice Rivers is basically telling Daemon here what she's been telling him all season long, that he spent his whole life seeking his own path, doing his own thing. That's why he's called the Rogue Prince in the books by the Maesters, because he goes it alone and does whatever he wants all the time, until now. Because he's just a chess piece on the board in the grand Game of Thrones, in the grand sense of things, against the White Walkers, the Night King, and the Next Long Night, which is basically the whole point of these visions. So just starting at the first vision that he has here, he sees a bunch of different things. The first is of the Weirwood roots traveling up the roots, like his perspective follows the roots themselves. It's meant to be a reference to the Weirwood network of roots just in general. All Weirwoods around Westeros are connected through their root system underground. It's a big part of how the Green Seers, like the Three-Eyed Raven and Bran, maybe Alice Rivers too, because there's rumors that she's also a Green Seer, can use the Weirwoods to see through time, particularly back in time. The rules for how this power works is a little bit different in the books. They're kind of mixing and matching things on the show so that dragon dreams kind of seem like the same thing, but they're not in the books. Normally, a Green Seer has to be touching a weirwood to use the ability, and you can only see things in the past that are in proximity to the weirwood tree, so you can't literally see every single thing that happens. You can only see things that the weirwoods themselves can see. But then Daemon sees the Blood Raven, aka Brynden Rivers, the Three-Eyed Raven, when he was younger, but after he had become the Three-Eyed Raven. Hard to tell how old he is here, but he's not that old. Really important for the timeline, though, as Daemon is getting this vision, Brynden Rivers has not been born yet. He's not born till much later in the timeline after Daemon passes away. But Brynden Rivers is very active during the events of Night of the Seven Kingdoms, which we're getting episodes for next year. So I think part of the reason why we're seeing Brynden Rivers now is because we're about to see him in actual present day when we see that Night of the Seven Kingdoms show. But when we eventually see him on that show, it'll be many years before he becomes the Three-Eyed Raven and gains these abilities and starts seeing through time. The place where Daemon is seeing him is under his weirwood north of the wall where Bran visited him and got trained by him. And I think what's actually going on here, like the way we're meant to take these visions, is that it's the Three-Eyed Raven in the future looking into the past, seeing Daemon, giving Daemon all these visions. Daemon himself is not a Green Seer. He wouldn't be able to have weirwood visions unless somebody else was giving him visions. So I think that person that's giving them to him is the Three-Eyed Raven. Notice when they zoom in on his face, you see the birthmark. That is from the books. The raven with the three eyes is the Three-Eyed Raven, thus like Bran saw a version of this when he was first injured. Notice the way the visions transition into the Raven's third eye. That's why I think this is the Three-Eyed Raven showing Daemon things from both the past and the future. Daemon's future, but for the Three-Eyed Raven, it's his past. When the camera transitions to the ground, I think this is meant to look like Daemon is seeing the Night King and his white army from the perspective of a direwolf. That's why the camera seems like it's loping towards the Night King. Notice it is a different actor playing the Night King than the person who played the Night King during Game of Thrones. I'm not sure why they changed the actor. Maybe he was just unavailable for this scene. But here's the other big part of this too. I think this isn't meant to be a vision of the future of the second long night during the Game of Thrones series that we saw during season 8. This is meant to be a vision of the past because green seers like the Three-Eyed Raven can only see stuff in the past, and he isn't alive during the events of the second long night, like he dies right before that happens. So I think he's showing Daemon what the first long night looked like 8,000 years ago in the books and like 1,000 years ago on the show. And it's meant to be similar to something that Aegon the Conqueror saw in his dragon dream, but because dragon dreams are meant to be of things in the future, Aegon would have been seeing the second long night, not the first long night. The show doesn't really differentiate between the past and the present during these visions, so if you're a little confused, don't worry about it. Then this next vision of the dead dragons is meant to be the death of all the dragons. I think it's meant to be the doom of Valyria based on the flames in the background. Like this is after the 14 flames had erupted, destroying everything. R.I.P. Maybe we'll see a bigger version of that during an animated Ancient Valyria TV show. George R. Martin has been hyping up that they're doing that in animation at some point. This scene of him falling down and drowning amongst all the dead bodies, I think is meant to be mud mixed with blood. It might be a reference to the Blackfyre Rebellion, which was a major event in Brynden Rivers' earlier life before he became the Three-Eyed Raven. We might get another TV show where they cover Blackfyre Rebellion. It overlaps with the events of Night of the Seven Kingdoms TV show, but if we see Blackfyre Rebellion stuff during that show, it'd have to be flashbacks. When he falls through the bodies into the water and begins to float to the bottom drowning, that's a reference to what Alice Rivers was telling him about his own future at the God's Eye earlier this season. We can't talk too much about that without getting into spoilers, but the very deep water is a reference to the lake around the God's Eye here, right next to where he's standing, getting these visions. This is meant to be the red comet that we saw at the beginning of the main Game of Thrones show, and this is Daenerys' dragon eggs in the fire being hatched while Khal Drogo is burning. Then Daemon sees Daenerys with her 3 hatched dragons, essentially the end of Game of Thrones Season 1, Episode 10. Then Daemon's last vision is of Rhaenyra on the Iron Throne with her crown in its present-day adult Rhaenyra. I think this is meant to be a scene from Season 3, Episode 1, and they'll end on that shot like at the very end of Episode 1. They'll end with her sitting on the Iron Throne with her crown. Then it gets really trippy because Helaena shows up saying that it's all a story, you're but one part in it, you know your part. Helena's line at the end there at King's Landing makes it seem like she's actually speaking directly to Daemon in real time through the King's Landing Weirwood network, because there's a Weirwood tree in the King's Landing Godswood. But because she's not near the Godswood, they're getting really trippy with the way that her Dragon Dream powers actually work, which aren't totally like they are in the books. Like they're basically expanding her powers. I've talked about this before, but I think this is the show sort of conflating different ideas where they're saying that dragon dreams are similar to Weirwood visions when they're not in the books. Like in the books are completely separate ideas. But on the show, at least, the new canon is that Helena's ability allows her to also communicate with other people inside these visions. But he's taking this to heart about his own role in the prophecy of the prince who was promised in the coming long night. I did a whole separate video about Helena's dragon dreams and the things that she's seen. Essentially, she's also seen everything that happens in the future as well, too, completely separate from this. Jon Snow, Daenerys, the White Walkers, I'll put a link for that video in the description below. What the show is doing, though, is using Daemon meeting the Three-Eyed Raven here, seeing the Long Night, the Night King, all these things, to solidify the fact that he's fully Team Rhaenyra now and is on board with all the prophecy stuff that he'd always ignored before during his entire life. That's why later in the episode, Rhaenyra says, "You sound an awful lot like my father Viserys," talking about all this prophecy stuff. So now Daemon is committed to support Rhaenyra in her bid to unite the realm, because at the moment, they think that the Long Night could come at any moment. It could be next week, it could be next year in their eyes, even though technically we've seen the original show, so we know that it's not going to happen for almost 200 years. We get another scene of Aemond with Helaena trying to convince her to fly on Dreamfire to Harrenhal, so we know that Aemond is headed to Harrenhal shortly. It almost looks like he's getting ready to cry here too, like there's a tear in his eye. That's how worried he is about the actual war itself. And this probably shouldn't be a surprise, like she's just confirming what most of us believed earlier this season, is that Helaena saw him burning Aegon in her dragon dreams, even though he tries to deny it, when she suggests that he might try to kill her the same way, like, are you gonna burn me too? She even says later, if you were to kill me, it's not going to change your fate. So a lot of people are asking if this means that Aemond will ultimately be the one to kill Helaena, making it a big change from the books. Without getting into spoilers, she winds up dying in a completely separate way. Like, obviously all the characters will eventually die at some point, they're not immortal. It's always possible that they change the way that Helaena dies. They've changed so much about her storyline. She's barely a character in the books. I expect her to be around till the final season on the show, just in general, so however she goes out, she will probably be around during season 4, early theory. So at least for right now, she's safe. That's also why she's not super worried about running out of the Red Keep. Like, I don't need to escape. I'm not gonna die. Like, Rhaenyra isn't gonna try and kill me. Then, no big surprise, Helaena drops some new Dragon Dream information here. She says that Aegon will be king again. That's not an opinion. She's seen it in her visions. It's an assured fact. So we know at some point he will return to King's Landing with Larys Strong, just like Larys told him that they would do, and he will reclaim the Iron Throne from whoever's sitting on it at the time, which sounds like it's going to be Rhaenyra. When she says he sits on a wooden throne, that's probably a reference to him sitting on a wheelchair, kind of like Bran did. Even though he can walk slightly better than Bran, like Bran could not walk at all, and Aegon can still kind of hobble along. Then Helaena full-on tells Aemond how he's going to die, and that he will die by the time that Aegon becomes king again. Like, based on the timeline of what she's talking about here, it sounds like he's going to die by the time that Aegon sits the Iron Throne again. Definitely puts a ticking clock on his lifespan, like start the countdown now. This is actually meant to tie back to Daemon's storyline, some of his visions of Aemond and what Alice Rivers told him at the beginning of the season when she said, "You're gonna die here," and his vision of drowning in the lake at the God's Eye in this episode. Helaena tells Aemond he'll also die basically the same way too, and they'll never find his body, he'll just disappear at the God's Eye. Does not seem like Aemond is too happy to hear that. Also, does he believe in prophecy and dragon dreams? Previously, I would have said yes, but here it sounds like he's looking for a way out to deny, like, no, you're wrong, I can't believe this. Even though under normal conditions, you'd think that he would buy into the idea of dragon dreams just because he's so studied in Valyrian history. Like I said, he's really acting more like the scared little boy that he was when he was younger. But probably one of the biggest takeaways here is that we have our Daemon versus Aemond fight on the board at the God's Eye. We'll see when they finally pay that off. My guess is either Season 3 finale or sometime during Season 4. My guess right now is they want to keep Matt Smith around on the show as much as possible, so they'll try to delay that big fight till Season 4. But by the end of Season 3, I think we'll start to see some of the big main characters die. I think they'll save a lot of that for Season 4, but at least like 1 or 2 big deaths during Season 3. Notice when Rhaenyra and Adam fly to Harrenhal, they fly over the God's Eye. They keep wanting you to remember the God's Eye just because it's referenced so many times in this episode and earlier this season. Love the way Caraxes greets the other dragons too, like, "Yay, my friends are here. I've been so lonely since Daemon has been doing nothing but having weirwood visions this whole time." We get a really cool aerial shot of Harrenhal too. Daemon's flyby was during a storm at night. We also get a good look at Daemon's army of rivermen. When she goes to find out what's what, Daemon surprises her by bending the knee and sounding just like her father Viserys. I know this is going to be a controversial choice, all these weirwood visions, all the three-eyed raven stuff, causing him to buy into all this prophecy stuff so much. This episode does change a lot of things from the books. But this is just meant to confirm that this entire season for Daemon has been him getting his groove back via weirwood visions. Now he's way more focused on the real threat, the White Walkers, and he's way more Team Rhaenyra. There are a couple of funny moments too when Rhaenyra calls him out in front of everyone really loudly, like, "Who are you loyal to? Like, who do you swear fealty to?" And he kind of rolls his eyes and looks around at everybody. I think he's mostly laughing at himself, like, yeah, you're kind of expecting me to say that I'm doing this all for me. We get another cool scene of them talking to each other in High Valyrian. When he says the war is just beginning, it's him saying that he thinks the Long Night is about to happen any moment now, and it'll make their war against the Greens seem like a common slap fight. He also says winter is coming, the motto of House Stark, like everybody doing the meme, pointing at the screen. He said the thing. He also tells her about his visions. He's actually seen the Long Night, and she believes him. Notice he says, "till the end of our story," more reference to this grand story that Helaena talks about. You're part of this story. The story of A Song of Ice and Fire, which is written by George R. Martin. So part of the idea is that they're coming to the same page here. They're on a united front heading into Season 3. And it seems like based on Rhaenyra's actions later in the episode that they'll sack King's Landing and take the Iron Throne with a little help from Alicent. Thank you for the assist, letting us know that Aemond is going to be conveniently absent. When Mysaria says the gods favor Rhaenyra, this sort of feeds into the idea that Rhaenyra is starting to drink her own Kool-Aid that she's also been pouring to all the dragon seeds. She's starting to feel more like a cult leader, believing that she is the princess who was promised, the chosen one spoken of in Aegon's prophecy, like she believes that she is the fulfillment of the prophecy, which we know is wrong. She's starting to act a little more unhinged, and I think ultimately that will start to sow her downfall, to make another reference back to the Red Sowing, thinking that she is the princess who was promised and how that drives her decision-making through Season 3. Corlys meets with Alan about to set sail, who takes the opportunity to clear the air with them about his entire terrible childhood. All this talk of him being too silent, needing to act more like a leader, is Corlys slowly warming up to the idea of naming Alan his heir and eventually legitimizing him. But then surprisingly, maybe not surprisingly, Alan calls him on it, basically implying that Corlys only cares about him now because all of his previous heirs, like his natural-born children, have died and he needs an heir. So you only care about us because you need an heir, not because you actually care about us. He also implies that if he survives the war, the Dance of the Dragons here, then he wants nothing from him and he will just go back to his old life before this. Like, he doesn't want to be his heir, essentially. My assumption here is that he'll eventually come around on that and he will become Corlys' heir. Speaking of which, then we get our big scene of Alicent and Rhaenyra together again, a parallel to earlier this season when Rhaenyra did the same thing, sneaking into King's Landing to try and see Alicent. There's a lot you can say about this conversation. I'm sure Tumblr is going to have a field day with this. Alicent is basically confessing all of her past misdeeds to Rhaenyra, going back to when they were teenagers and when she started acting really pissed off and mean to her, all the terrible things that she's ever done to her, essentially. All the way through, eventually usurping the crown for her, but like, yeah, sorry about all that weird stuff that I did to you. And it feels like their dynamic has flipped since earlier this season when they did the similar thing, because now Rhaenyra is acting more like Alicent did back then, saying that it's too late for that. But essentially, Alicent betrays the Greens, asking Rhaenyra to sack King's Landing bloodlessly, and she'll just help turn over the Iron Throne to him because Aemon will be gone with Vhagar at Harrenhal, leaving the city undefended, and Helaena won't have any trouble handing over the Iron Throne because she doesn't even want it to begin with. Like, she's gone full Jon Snow, I don't want it. But Rhaenyra's "it's too late" comment is mostly a reference to it being too late for them to spare Aegon's life. She says the only way, at least that she thinks, to secure her rule is to cut off his head for all to see. In the way they leave things, Alicent seems like she's accepted this sad reality, like this is going to end badly. But we know that Aegon sneaks away with Larys Strong, and according to Helaena, will eventually reclaim the Iron Throne from Rhaenyra, so this whole endeavor is definitely not ending the way that Rhaenyra thinks it's going to end. But I absolutely cannot wait to see if Helaena drops any dragon dreams in front of Rhaenyra, because now we're going to have Alicent and Rhaenyra and Helaena all in proximity to each other for at least part of Season 3. Rhaenyra, how do you feel about bugs? Why don't you come play with Helaena for a little while? Maybe she'll tell you some of the future. A couple of important bits of information that Alicent drops during their talk too, things that I think we knew as fans, but she just confirms them. Viserys was fond of Alicent, but he never got over the death of his first wife Aemma and was essentially obsessed with her for the rest of his life, so Alicent was more like a distraction to him than like a very close loved one. Notice she also starts biting her fingers. That was the nervous tic that she had when she was a teenager, and it's why her fingers were so messed up in episode 1. Then as she goes back to King's Landing slowly, we get that ending montage of all the different groups and characters. All the dragon seeds suiting up in armor, Hugh Hammer, Adam Hull. Notice the look on Ulf White's face, dude. Does that not seem problematic? Like he is definitely going to cause some problems in Season 3. Then we see Rhaena finally finding the sheep stealer who yells at her, but we don't actually see her claiming him or riding him. They stop short of that. I guess they're just leaving that for like Season 3, Episode 1. I was really hoping we'd actually see her flying around on him. We see the Hightower army with Daeron and Tessarion flying next to them, finally have Daeron on the show and Tessarion to boot. Please don't kill them off shortly in Season 3, like want to see them around on the show for a little while. Then we see Cregan Stark's Greybeards marching through the Twins, basically the Winterfell army, thanks to Jace, help earlier this season speeding up their arrival. I don't see Cregan Stark in the crowd here, but he will be back in Season 3. He's a much bigger part of the Dance of the Dragon story in the later part of the actual dance. That was why they only just teased him at the beginning of this season, like he isn't really active in the actual story this early in the story. This is Jason Lannister's army marching into the Riverlands like they just arrived at the Riverlands here. Daemon then clocking his rivermen. This is Tylan Lannister, Jason's twin, sailing back to Westeros with the Triarchy fleet that he was sent to procure. They're going to be a big problem for Corlys Velaryon's fleet. Then we see Alan Hull and Corlys in their armor heading to their flagship, preparing to fight the Triarchy in the Narrow Sea, but they probably do not expect the Triarchy to show up. And real big surprise, we finally find out what's been going on with Otto Hightower this whole season. It seems like he got captured at some point when he was heading back to Highgarden by the Beesbury army, and maybe it's Daeron and the Hightower army coming to rescue him here. But he does continue to be a part of the story during the events of Season 3, so like he will be back on the show. That's why they're showing you this tease of him here. This is also meant to pay off Alicent and Gwaine Hightower's conversation earlier this season when neither one of them had had any ravens back from Otto. Like they've been sending him messages, but they hadn't got any replies because he'd been in prison this whole time. The ironic thing about this, though, the fact that Otto Hightower was thrown in prison probably by the Beesburys as revenge for the death of Lord Beesbury, is because he didn't have anything to do with his death. That was all Criston Cole who killed him. Otto Hightower probably would have been happy to let him live. That was one of the jokes earlier this season when Aegon fired him, because Aegon was like, guess what Criston Cole did? And he just turns his head around slowly like, tell me what brilliant thing Criston Cole just did. That's part of the reason why Aemond actually wanted him back at the small council, like, find my grandfather, bring him back, because he's not an idiot like you guys. Then we see Aegon and Larys Strong sneaking out of King's Landing so nobody will know that he's gone till they're safely in Essos where Rhaenyra cannot behead him. And they end on the shot of Rhaenyra thinking about Alicent and Alicent staring out at the sunset. There's so much they're trying to wrap up this season heading into season 3. Generally seems like Rhaenyra is going to try and sack King's Landing and take the Iron Throne in episode 1. But there were so many Easter eggs and references. If you spotted any in the episode that I didn't mention in the video, just write them below in the comments. I'm working on my season 3 video. That'll post next. I'll start doing Night of the Seven Kingdoms videos soon too. Those episodes will start next year, so we won't have to wait too long to get episodes for that. I believe House of the Dragon Season 3 will not start till 2026 though, so it will be a couple years for House of the Dragon Season 3 episodes. Everybody post all your reactions to Season 2 in the comments below, just in general, like how did you feel about Season 2 compared to Season 1? HBO also dropped a teaser trailer for Night of the Seven Kingdoms, so I'll do a video for that after I get done with my Season 3 video next. Click here for my Season 3 video, I'll update the link as soon as I post that, and click here for all my other House of the Dragon episodes. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.